So the A&E Biography series continued on Sunday night with the focus on Booker T. The 2-hour documentary focused a lot on his upbringing, and I thought that aspect, like the first 45 minutes of this documentary, were extremely compelling. I thought among the strongest of any portions of these A&E versions of the WWE documentaries was kind of the path towards pro wrestling and what role it played, but really all of the upbringing, losing his father when he was 10 months old, his mother dying at 13, and essentially left an orphan with his sister. And I mean, this was a guy that went through a very hard life and, of course, ends up in prison after all of the robberies and gets 5 years and then out on parole after 19 months. And it's pro wrestling that largely gets his life on the right track with a goal, with something to work towards, and getting himself out of a life that very much could have been a much more harmful path for him.
Yeah, going into this one, I don't know how excited I was for it. Booker T is certainly a name, but maybe not as big of a he's not as big of a name as maybe some of the other people that A&E are about to profile. But I think it's also for that reason that I felt this one, could have been more compelling, because we haven't had a million documentaries about Booker T. We know his story, but we might not know it as much, or we haven't had it repeated to us as much as maybe some of the others. So watching it, I totally agree with you. Everything, like, this man has lived, a really heartbreaking life and has come out of it the other way, among some of the most well-balanced and successful people in this business. And as far as things that I wasn't even aware of, I didn't even know the man had a child, like when he was 17 years old.
He was 17, yeah. He's got a 35-year-old son now that he talks about is actually, at least at the time of when this interview was conducted, was in prison.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was kind of startling information, but to all that stuff, and then talking about meeting Sharmell and then seeing how great he is with his family, it really is an amazing rags to riches story. How did you feel about the career coverage that they did?
That's where, listen, when you're watching these, I think it becomes very easy for us to pick apart what is left out when it comes to the wrestling aspects. And listen, you cannot cover everything in a guy's career in the time frame. I would much rather that they focus more on what we got from that first 40 minutes rather than cramming in so much wrestling. I didn't think for a second that TNA would be even a part of this or leaving the WWE. I didn't expect them to touch on the Signature Pharmacy issue, which for those that are not familiar, Sports Illustrated was the ones who did this investigation in 2007, and it named a lot of WWE performers that were clients of this online Signature Pharmacy that led to suspensions. The New York Daily News then did a follow-up and included Booker T's name, which he has been adamant since that he did not purchase anything from Signature Pharmacy, but was suspended by WWE and ended up several months later requesting his release and leaving. That's where he goes to TNA. Again, I didn't expect that part to be covered, but what everyone was talking about today more so was the omission of everything surrounding WrestleMania 19. And I think that given how much backlash there was to that angle at the time, yes, today, but also then. This was not something like just in hindsight looked bad. It was poorly received at the time in 2003. You introduced many different elements of race that Booker T encountered throughout his career, from the warning that he received from Ox Baker about you're very talented, but you will encounter obstacles throughout your career, not stating it outright, but alluding to his race. They cover the treatment he received from fans when he was in Global in Dallas, the Hog Wild incident, which is the way it comes off in the documentary is almost like, wow, we were getting all this great heat. It was disgusting that this was happening in 1996. So to me, when you are showcasing different racial elements that they had to encounter throughout their wrestling careers, and then when Booker T had I would say the most high profile match of his career, if it's not number one, it's among them in his career, to completely omit that And for this gigantic stage for him to be on, challenging for the world title at WrestleMania, that the largest company in the world felt that it was in their promotional interest to lean and play the race card and completely ignore it in this documentary, a total cop-out.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. It also wasn't something I expected them to cover. Again, it's a reminder that it's a WWE production. And last week we had, by contrast, I would say a documentary that did focus on a lot of the nastier parts of a person's life. But at no point throughout last week's documentary did I ever feel like the finger was being pointed towards the WWE. And this would be a situation that would be not just directly pointed at WWE, but who is in the position of playing that racist character, but a man who is in charge, one of your executives right now in the company. That would have been, I think, a pretty difficult balancing act for them to justify. And for that reason, I didn't expect them to cover it. But again, this is what we have to expect from this type of production that is being put together by the company.
Yeah, do you hesitate to call it a documentary at this point? Because, and listen, I'm not even saying this in a flippant manner. I think that there is a solid percentage of the fan base that doesn't want a warts and all documentary, that wants a feel-good WWE release, for lack of a better term. And I do think like that is, there were people that were very upset with the portrayal of Randy Savage last week. And I don't think it was necessarily because of whether these allegations were true or not. It was, I think for many, that they hold Randy Savage in this pristine status and want that fantasy to be maintained of this was a hero of a fan base growing up that want to see the preservation of that hero. Even though the truth may sometimes force you to have to reconcile that heroism that you attach to some of these people. Now, in this case, this is not any slight on Booker. This is a slight on the company. And in the not too distant past as well, we're only talking about 18 years ago. And there's certainly other things. I mean, certainly we were not going to get an example of Vince McMahon and Booker T at the 2005 Survivor Series, which, again, I think
they did play his other N-word incident, though, from WCW.
You're right. They did play the Spring Stampede clip from 97.
But that was more like a slip of the tongue from Booker, attributed to Booker as a mistake, not something that points to the poor judgment of the WWE, and Vince in particular.
Not at all. I thought that it was very difficult that we were... once you've opened the door and we are talking about different elements of racism within the industry, I found it very difficult to go from that and then Hulk Hogan being a prominent talking head in this documentary. And that brings us to David Dennis Jr., who was the writer and professor that was interviewed in this. And on Sunday night, he had tweeted, "So one of the main reasons I was brought in was to talk about WrestleMania 19. I went in about it for a long time, but my ass knew it wasn't making the final cut, so I figured I was going to get cut out from the whole doc." And he later deleted this tweet, but enough people saw this. And Booker T actually did address the WrestleMania 19 omission on his own Hall of Fame podcast. This was transcribed by Fightful. And Booker said, this was on Monday, "How can it be pulled when it never actually got in? To write that it got pulled makes it seem like there was a whole lot of meat and potatoes on the bone of the Booker T and Triple H story, I guess. I never gave the story a whole lot of credence or given a lot of thought to me losing that match. They talk about the story, and I understand that, but I never looked at my career and framed my career around a single match. I got paid more money for that match than I got paid for any match in my life. I'm not going to complain about that. When people try to make something out of a racial issue between Booker T, Triple H, and WWE, someone is just trying to get some clicks. I just want everyone to know that that was not what my story was about at the end of the day. My story is not about the dark side of WrestleMania 19. For people to want to make it about that, I get it and understand, but for me personally, that's not what my career makeup is about." So, I mean, in that case, it's, what are we presenting here? Are we just presenting like a feel-good story that is not going to dive into any uncomfortableness? And maybe that's what a large portion of people want out of these documentaries. I think that once you're going down that path, and it just seems that we're going to talk about the racism from the fan base, we're going to talk about racism in the industry, but WWE they don't get to be put under any scrutiny for this. I think in my position, I'm allowed to call that out, and I think that's a very valid criticism. And Booker T even noting this was the match he got paid more money for. So in his career, this was the biggest match of his career from a financial standpoint. That's a major omission to just totally skip over such a prominent part of his career was challenging for that title.
Unfortunately, there's nothing at all surprising to me about Booker T's statement there, because I've heard enough of Booker T on his podcast, on his interviews, defend countless times anything that goes on that is critical of this company that he is employed by, to know that he will stand by this company as long as he is under their employ, maybe even outside of his employ. Maybe this is truly how he feels. But we also, to me, it's just another reminder that, anytime we talk about a WWE production, perhaps it's a mistake to think about these as investigative pieces, and really just instead they are forms of entertainment that is being commissioned by this company. They are earning money from its production. They are spreading its name out there. There are pieces of PR you might even consider, but in the end, it's about making money and it's about entertainment. And I suppose sullying the name and brand image of this company is not conducive to either of those aims.
But you change the goalposts week to week. It's when it's convenient to be to go into those dark investigative topics.
As long as it's not about yourself. Yes,
exactly.
Well, you can use other people's, maybe dark histories for, I don't know, and I hate to call it entertainment, but to create a compelling piece of television. That seems fair game. I mean, it comes to know this is nothing surprising, to any of us who have ever watched a WWE production, documentary, DVD, anything like that. I guess it's just a reminder that, hey, in the end, somebody has a final edit, and there is going to be some say from the people that are being covered about what gets to be said.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting. I think this one is just more illuminating because of the fact that an interview subject was brought in to talk about that. So there was at least a decision made by somebody that this was relevant material to cover and a topic we did want to tackle. And what the process was, that's unknown about now, why it wasn't even addressed or mentioned. But we got plenty of breakdowns of the Spinaroonie. That was isolated. Dude, we went twice within the documentary. We had Spinaroonie chapters.
Well, there's a lot of that. But even going back to talking about the WCW instance where he uttered the N-word. I mean, if we're talking about what's relevant to a man's career, how relevant was that to the Booker T story? So what kind of argument is that?
Yeah, versus a major, to me, I think they are so just averse to any kind of self-analysis that I think they sometimes overthink things versus having that ability to look back and give any kind of honest view of what were we trying to achieve with this story? Why did we go this direction? And how would we tackle such a story today? I don't expect that kind of self-reflection, but I think at times it's a company that is paranoid at themselves looking in any kind of look at some of the things that this company has incurred in their history and look at them, how they're standing. They are largely an untouchable company.
Well, I mean, this kind of goes to perhaps a bigger discussion about the philosophy of professional wrestling itself, in that it is there to create illusion, to try to make somebody look perhaps an exaggerated form or better in many cases than what reality exists, right? Going back to WrestleMania this year, deciding to clean up some of the best parts, in my opinion, of the production, the improvised, interviews because of that rain delay, or I guess the Mandy Rose slip. Have we come to a decision about whether or not that was actually left in there?
I mean, the angle seems to be dropped. We're not mentioning the slip anymore. Nia Jax is no longer slipping every week.
Anyway, that's a bigger discussion. But anyway, are there other subjects that are coming up in the A&E series that you feel like might be another indication of whether or not they'd be censoring themselves that you'd be curious to see?
I mean, with Sean, there's certainly,
So now, Sean, I'm sure, his story is out there. He and they have a redemptive story, because by the end of it, he comes up with the best run of his career, and he's religious, and he's just so much better now. But is there anything that seemingly is unjustifiable that is a WWE decision that you feel like might come up.
Well, let me ask you, if you have footage of Sean pilled up on television, are you going to be showing that? Are you going to, like, there's some, like that guy was a wreck at times, especially in the later 90s, before he took his break.
Under their watch.
Under their watch, very much so. I'll be curious to, like, certainly they're going to go down that path. Will it just be the illusions of demons that he was fighting, or are we going to get into specifics about how bad things were getting for him, how deep you go into about when he was supposed to be at WrestleMania in 2001 and showed up in no condition to perform.
But again, that would be something that's on Sean, you know, like
right.
What is a bad WWE decision that might come up?
Well, I guess at times, like, what was this guy capable of being on the road and being, you know, a weekly character that you were relying upon when this guy was going through a lot of problems? I think they are going to dive into a lot of that. I think you have to over 2 hours. And to your point, again, the redemptive stories. They are pretty willing to go into how far someone falls when there's the light at the end of the tunnel. And, you know, you cover a Booker T's early life with the knowledge that this was a guy who really, it should be applauded of what he was able to do with his life. William Regal would be another example of that as well, that they have these stories of people that hit some very low lows, but were able to get their lives together.
Yeah. And again, like, I think the fact that we're not getting a Hulk Hogan one is another indicator too, that like they only want to cover perhaps the prettier side of, you know, the WWE affiliated stories.
Yeah. I think the Warrior one, that's going to be the one that will get the most attention, because that's one, again, I would say that if these were 44-minute documentaries, I think they could skirt by skipping a lot more stuff. In 2 hours, you are making pretty conscious decisions of significant things to omit, such as a WrestleMania 19 that you could absolutely have dedicated 5 or 6 minutes to. And for an Ultimate Warrior, if that is a hero piece for 2 hours, that doesn't go into a lot of the more unsavory things that he stated and put out there while he was alive, I mean, that's going to be a very conscious decision. And with Hulk Hogan, I mean, yes, when you look at this lineup of names, his, you would imagine, would be right in there. And I mean, they may feel like we can't do 2 hours and avoid this topic, and it's not something we want to tackle.
Would you recommend this A&E documentary?
I still would, because the first 40 minutes I thought were as compelling as any of these A&E documentaries. I thought it was really strong stuff. I enjoyed the musical choices that they used, really giving you a sense of the time period and where he was coming up. And as well, like towards the end, like the scenes at home with his family are just heartwarming, with his 2 twins and with Charmel. Like, this is a guy that has a tremendous family life and seems to be living a fantastic life. But I think with the wrestling, I think there's criticism you can have that at the end of the day, you're not going to expect out of these documentaries. But then there's others that, to me, the WrestleMania 19 stuff, like that to me is a standard you have to acknowledge in some form or fashion, because you were fine to go into it in certain elements, but when it came to the WWE under that spotlight, it was completely avoided.
I'd probably recommend the first hour, and you know, if you have any sort of like if you really want to relive the career of Booker T, like the second portion really just kind of goes by, you know, this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And by the way, the Spinner Rooney was really popular. And then, you know, he became King Booker and the end. So you might enjoy that. You might not. I'll tell you, you know, it really did kind of illuminate how much personality this guy had when he, specifically after the invasion. Like when he really kind of found himself with the Goldust thing, then, you know, compared to his entire run in WCW or even during the invasion before, it just, to me, like, it really stood out to me how funny he was, especially as King Booker, of course.
The part where they try and recap what was trying to be achieved at the Bash at the Beach event in 2000.
Yeah.
I'm watching this and thinking, if you are not a fan of this industry, if you do not follow wrestling, you have to have the lowest opinion, because it sounded absolutely ludicrous. and just so stupid.
Or you might have thought it was the coolest thing ever.
I doubt it.
Oh, they broke the script.
It was so
They
lame.
said this. They called it the script on a wrestling show.
Which, I mean, the story, like, what was to happen was this idea that we would come up with a scenario where you'd have two people with claims to the championship in Hogan and Booker coming out of that night. And naturally, it's Hogan comes back. And what happened was when Vince Russo went out and did that promo, that's where he just went off the rails. And that was what led to Hulk Hogan legitimately filing a lawsuit over it and never comes back to WCW. But that was very much the intention when that whole, the laydown angle, which was the second time within a year that Russo had booked that finish. They did the Hogan Sting deal not too many months before that. It was pretty tired the first time, much less a second time. But that was...
How many laydown angles has Hogan been in?
Well, the two. He did the two with...
What about the finger poke?
Okay, yeah, if you want to count that, that would be 3. Just memorable moments in WCW history that really stand the test of time. But that was that. Do you believe, because another aspect of the whole Booker Triple H deal is that Booker T winning in the end doesn't necessarily justify the use of playing the race card, but at the very least, it's the heel getting his comeuppance and Booker T gets the big win and the title. Instead, he loses clean in the middle at Safeco Field. And if he wins that championship, do you see like much of a different forecast for where Booker goes in that company? Because I in 2003 on Raw, that championship was at the waist of Triple H. And it was at most Booker's getting a 4-week run with that. And then it's back around Hunter. Like, I don't think it's a career-changing moment if Booker T wins that match, especially when who's showing up the next night? It's your new babyface project in Bill Goldberg, who would have, I mean, Bill Goldberg, they couldn't get right. So I didn't sense that Booker T was going to be the babyface to break through and become the superstar had he won that night. I think it would have made the angle a bit more palatable to people. But at the same time, I don't think it's a game changer, pardon the pun, for Booker T.
No, it wouldn't have made a grand difference in the state of his career where he would have ended up. But I definitely think, if it did happen, if he did win, you might have at least seen it get mentioned in a documentary like this. Might have been the whole.
Then we'd have to acknowledge it. That was the key. It's that at the end of this, it's like, guys, Hunter's been the racist heel. He's got to go over. Why? Because we never want to acknowledge this on a Booker T retrospective 2 decades from now.
Yes. Yeah, it wouldn't have made it better, but it would have made it a little bit better, I guess.